In the spring of 2009, George Condo, a visual artist from New York City, received a mysterious call from Honolulu, halfway across the world. It was coming straight from Kanye West, who, while holed up on an island in the middle of the ocean to finish his next masterpiece, decided that Condo was the only one who could design the album's cover. Up until this point, Condo had been no slouch. He'd been working with New York City's most iconic artists for years: Andy Warhol, Keith Haring, Jack Kerouac, Jean-Michel Basquiat, to name just a few. Basically, people knew who he was. His own art style, simulated realism, was developed in an effort to join academic European painting with 20th century pop art, and his paintings had been displayed extensively at prestigious galleries in the US and Europe since the 1980s. Renowned art dealer Adam Lindemann wrote that, along with Basquiat and Keith Haring, Condo was instrumental in the international revival of painting throughout the 80s. But back to 2009 and the phone call from Hawaii. At 56 years old, Condo wasn't particularly familiar with modern hip-hop, so Kanye's music was a new concept. But breaking artistic boundaries wasn't, and their collaboration would result in 5 of the greatest album covers of all time. But first, let's talk about the music. As every fan of Kanye already knows, the late 2000s were a dark time in his career. Following an album that somewhat disappointed fans at first, and the death of his mother not 2 years earlier, Kanye stole the mic from Taylor Swift during the VMAs in an awkward moment that could be heard around the world and would stain his career forever. His planned 808s and Heartbreak tour with Lady Gaga was suddenly cancelled. He was public enemy number 1 overnight. He needed something big, something huge to come back from this, so he collected some of the biggest names in music, holed himself up in Hawaii, and emerged from the studio with arguably the best album of the entire decade. Dark Twisted Fantasy tells a grandiose story. It details the dark side of consumer culture, race relations, and the American dream. Alone, this album is a spectacular show of exactly why Kanye is considered one of the greatest living artists. Grand excess, beautiful production, and deeply human themes of success and failure together. But with George Condo's help, the album's cover is equal in quality and in theme to the music, and honestly, I want to say it wouldn't be the same without it. George Condo produced 8 paintings during the summer he worked with Kanye, and 5 were chosen to be included for the album. Kanye visited his studio 10 times, and each time he went, they would listen to songs from the project and come up with concepts. Each artwork tells a story and has a unique theme, ranging from religious to spiritual, with some even taking inspiration from Shakespearean motifs. Let's get into it. Number 1, Kanye and his Phoenix. A grotesque, naked Kanye West relaxes on a couch with a beer in his hand. A naked, armless woman sits on his lap, complete with wings, a tail, and fearsome facial features. George Condo says she's kind of a fragment between a sphinx, a phoenix, a haunting ghost, and a harpy. And then Kanye is also in some sort of strange 1970s burned out backroom of a Chicago blues club having a beer, so far away from the real Kanye that it's just a scream. Kanye loved it, and it became the primary cover of the record, although you may not recognize it in such high definition. It was censored by every single music streaming service, so this is probably the version you've seen most of the time. This wasn't an accident. Kanye actually specifically requested that Condo make sure one of the covers would be banned by retailers. A month before the album was released, Kanye tweeted that Walmart had banned his record from being sold due to the inappropriate cover. Walmart responded by saying they were looking forward to having his record in stores, and they hadn't been shown any art yet, proving that Kanye is once again a master of publicity. Number 2, The Dancer. A ballerina in a black dress stands away from the viewer, but turns around to look to the side. She's holding a glass of wine as if to make a toast. When some retailers did refuse to sell the record with the original cover, this was sometimes substituted instead, making it the record's second most well-known cover. At one point during Condo and Kanye's listening sessions, they were listening to Runaway when Condo's wife showed Kanye a video of a ballerina moving in slow motion, which Kanye latched onto. Ballerinas would later become a central visual motif for the record's short film. Condo says the ballerina's glass is a reference to Runaway's chorus, which suggests toasting Kanye's various enemies. Number 3, The Sword. A sword pierces Kanye's crowned, decapitated head. His face is frozen in a permanent look of shock and anger. With this painting, Condo wanted to depict a Shakespearean scene, and consistent with his personal style, he mixed cubism and classicism to do so. The Shakespeare influence came from where Kanye was at this point in his public life. He wanted to depict Kanye's tragic character arc, the king in a self-imposed exile. This painting was Kanye's Twitter avatar for a long time, so it's probably the 3rd most well-known of all the paintings. Number 4 and 5, 2 screaming faces, one with 4 mouths, the other with 3. They're portraits of Kanye, once again in the Cubist style. This one comes from Kanye's very first visit to Condo's studio, where he played Power. Condo heard the King Crimson sample and immediately knew he wanted to paint a portrait. The portrait clearly takes inspiration from the cover art for King Crimson's 1969 album, In the Court of the Crimson King. Condo describes the painting like this: like an African mask with almost a modern face. I wanted to get the feeling that he's like a Miles Davis type of guy. Dark Twisted Fantasy and its album covers are perfect examples of how cover art can elevate a record. If Dark Twisted Fantasy didn't have such iconic cover art, would it still be such an iconic album? Would it be able to stand the test of time if it looked like every other hip-hop record? It certainly doesn't sound like any other hip-hop record, and it takes someone with a vision as powerful as Kanye to curate a whole experience like this, where every single piece of the project is big, impactful, emotional, and worth examining. There may be artists who get more views and streams than Kanye, but almost no one could ever compete when it comes to the amount of detail he puts into his work. His best album, the best album of our time, has not one amazing, detailed, meaningful cover, but 5 separate ones, all carefully designed and painted by one of the greatest painters alive. Because just as we talked about before with the cover art for Kids See Ghosts, when it comes to Kanye's art, nothing will do but the very best. This has been Volksgeist. Thank you for watching.